That was Robert Keith Wallace. Actually, he was he the first or close to the first person to actually do uh, physiological testing on people practicing meditation. Were there many
He,
before him?
well, there may have been, particularly in India, but nothing had the impact that Keith's work did.
Right.
Keith did it at as a PhD student at UCLA, and when it first came out, I think in 1970, it caused quite a fuss. It
Right.
was groundbreaking at the
Right.
time, and was in Science magazine as well as a professional journal.
And in Scientific American in 1972, and it was a
Yeah,
big
that came
story.
out later.
Yeah.
That's when Herbert Benson at Harvard picked
Hmm.
up on Keith's work, and they collaborated and did another study similar,
Hmm.
and that ended up in Scientific American. And of course, everything really took off from there. It was
Right.
a phenomenal
Yeah, there
thing
was
within.
Dr. Gluck at the Institute of Living in Hartford,
Oh yeah,
Connecticut.
and many other things. And within a few years, I'm giving a talk soon in L.A. at Loyola Marymount on how meditation went from the fringes of the counterculture into the mainstream, and I'll be talking about this and Keith's work and the explosion of scientific research
Right.
on meditation and
Right.
TM in particular
Right.
back in the early 70s. It's really historic, and Keith doesn't get the credit he deserves,
Right.
in my opinion.
Yeah, and again, all of that is covered pretty extensively in your book,
Hmm.
American Veda. His book, Dharma Parenting, I found it fascinating, and I actually it was it's a lot of practical stuff. And I mentioned I have a friend that has a young kid that is having a lot of trouble sleeping, and from the Ayurvedic perspective, it's probably a kid with a Vata imbalance, which means the mind keeps racing and all, and it's hard to settle down. And I would think through certain types of diet and behavior, or maybe things they can do or not
Yeah.
do at certain times, they could have a big impact, as opposed to the parent going out and getting some sleeping pills or whatever for the kid, or
Yeah.
you know
And one of the things I wish I had thought of asking him, I wish we had just ran out of time, was, remember when we had Marianne Williamson on for the second time, one of
hmm
the things she talked about was this overdiagnosis of ADHD
right.
and how it's messing up so many kids. And I just heard some scientists on the radio talking about this. The over medication of kids being diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. A large percentage of whom are just kids.
Right.
Who are restless. And I bet Keith and Fred address this in the book because some of that may just be an imbalance.
Absolutely, Phil. This is a great point. I was originally in graduate school to be in clinical psychology, to be a school psychologist. So I worked in that area. I was a substitute school teacher. I worked with kids, and there's a certain percentage of kids. When kids go to school, it's not necessarily a natural setting. You're warehousing kids from 9 to 3 generally. They're to sit down. They're to face forward. They're not to move around. And a lot of kids, it goes against their physiological needs. It's just not natural for them. So if you go to any school and the bell rings at 3 o'clock and the kids come out, they explode out the doors. They need more movement. They need more activity. And
Absolutely.
so some kids get a little restless in class, and it's hard on the teacher. And the easiest thing for a teacher to do is say, all right, put that kid on medication. So then you
Right.
have, Johnny is drooling in the back of the classroom, but he's not bothering anybody, so that's fine. Well, it's not fine for Johnny.
Right.
And then okay, and they invent these disorders like attention deficit disorder so that they can prescribe medicines. Now, there are a certain number of kids who do need very specific help because they're so far out the norm. But now the number of kids they're considering to be, attention deficit disorder is out of control. It's ridiculous.
And it was, look, Um, I felt that way when I was a kid. I was very
Right,
fast. My brain was very fast. So I got good grades, but I was very restless in school. But we had recess,
right,
and we had, you could get out at lunchtime if and run home, and then we got out at 3 o'clock, and we weren't overwhelmed with homework. We could go play, and all that helps. Plus, on top of everything else, they're cutting back on physical, on PT or phys ed or whatever it's called, and feeding kids all this sugar and carbohydrates in the
right.
lunchroom. No wonder
Right,
everybody's,
right, and
going.
along those lines. I mean, it's like when we were kids, you came home from school and you'd go out and play. Now everything is more structured. They have play dates. They have
Right.
karate class. They have this class, that class. And it's a little bit too much structure. A lot of people feel. The other thing is, if you take a young kid and you say, especially like 8, 9 year olds, say, "What's your favorite subject in school?" 9 times out of 10, they're going to say physical education
Of
because that's what
course.
they want to be. They're not getting enough of that. And like you said, they're cutting back. And I remember I had a teacher in seventh or eighth grade, and you could feel the class was getting out of control. People, and she used to say, Mrs. Saclambetti, she'd say, "All right, everybody stand up, hands to the side, up." And we used to play Simon Says or whatever. And she would
You're
get us
right.
going. And it was such a relief. You felt so good after that. And
Right.
it was, so they need more of that in the schools. And
So
I
I
think,
would
yeah,
bet that this book, Dharma Parenting, could also be useful in the school systems.
right.
Where they're parents for essentially acting in the role of parents for a certain number of hours a day.
Right. If you put meditation in school, which a lot of schools have done now, or at least quite a few, and you put more physical activity structured into it, I think you get much better results. And at least
Yeah, and
now,
change the diet.
yeah,
I think changing the kids'
yeah.
diets
I
would
was
be a
just
big
in
deal too.
yeah, I was just in Sweden. I have a niece and two nephews in school there, and they have all they every kid in Sweden every day gets a free lunch at school. So they all stay in school and they eat. And as much as possible, the food is locally sourced. And they're
Is
very
it?
there's no they have two choices in terms of drinks at school. One is water, the other is milk. I said, what about chocolate milk? What about absolutely not? Now kids eat junk outside of school, and it's not but in school this is what they do. So every kid gets a good lunch, and they're very careful about sugar and that sort of thing. Also, I saw Michael Moore's latest film recently, and one of the things he focuses on is he goes into a lunchroom in France in a school in an urban area, and they have a chef there, and the kids are not eating junk; they're eating good food and not processed foods and all. And I think that has a huge impact. Like you said, I give you an example. When I was working, training as a school psychologist in Jersey City, New Jersey, I would I'd be in the school and I'd be counseling these kids, 12 years old. What did you have for breakfast today, Bill? Oh, I had a Coke and a bag of potato chips. Well,
Mm.
and then they come into school and they're off the wall. That and
Right.
probably not getting enough sleep, and you're starting the day off with on a bad footing, and you're probably going to have problems.
Yeah. Well, I bet there would be a lot of parents who could benefit from reading Dharma Parenting, and also a lot of people listening to us now who have raised their children already and wish they had a resource like that
Right,
when they were young, but maybe they'll
right,
pass it on to their kids so their
right.
grandchildren will be raised
Right.
better.
And I've known, as you, I've known Keith for years, and I've seen him interact with people, and he's really good at understanding people and working with their type. Even before he studied Ayurveda, I think that like he said, don't confront somebody when they're in a situation where they're having a meltdown. There's different ways to deal with it. So I think a lot of people like Keith are very natural in their abilities to sense what's the right thing to do. On the other hand, a lot of people aren't, and I think
Right.
this book will give good guidelines for that, and make you to start thinking about it. Just thinking and realizing that there are different types of people, different types of kids, because everybody generally thinks the world is as they are, and it
Yeah,
doesn't
I
work
mean,
that way.
people recognize that kids are different from one another, but having a way to categorize those
Hmm.
differences with guidelines for following up on them would help a great deal, I'm sure.
Great. All right. So all is well. I wanted to ask, how's your biography coming along that you're writing on Paramahansa Yogananda?
Well, depending on when someone listens to this, it's going very well, and it's either going too slow or it's going right on time.
Right. And we'll probably have somebody, I would think, from SRF on
Yeah,
sometime in
we'll
the near
have
future.
people soon.
Okay,
Right.
great. All right. Till
Thanks.
next time, Phil.
Okay.